the impact of delaying is not just necessarily on the portfolio itself, but it could be, okay, what about step 2 and step 3? It could delay that as well. So for me, time is money, and it's the power of compounding. You want to get started as early as you possibly can to allow it to do its thing.
Welcome to 360 Money Matters, where financial planners Billy and Andrew talk all things financial planning. This podcast aims to increase your knowledge and confidence with all things money. Each week, they will cover topics such as investing, cash flow, budgeting, saving, passive income, debt management, and much more, so you can live a life on your terms without limits.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the 360 Money Matters podcast. I'm Billy and I'm joined by my co-host,
Andrew. Bills, here we are back on the 360 Money Matters podcast.
Andrew, we have so much fun during the week talking about a whole range of different topics to our listeners and our viewers. This week is no different. I'm really excited about this one because this has come up a few times recently, and I think just in terms of how much noise is going on in the world, it's easy to do this. So hopefully I've built that up enough. But Andrew, what are we talking to everybody about today?
So really we're talking about the cost of procrastination. So really we're talking about in your financial planning, in your wealth creation, the cost of doing nothing. And either continuing with the status quo or just, not taking any action. And there's some obvious ones, and there's some things that people will usually, resonate with and recognize. And there's maybe some other things that people haven't considered when you start, talking about the cost of doing nothing.
Yeah. Often overlooked, I think, and not given enough attention and airtime, which is hopefully something that we can draw some attention to today and get people to start thinking about it. But at least from my perspective, from an investing sense, the thing that I tend to think about the most is compounding. So we talk about, the earlier you start, the better off your results, the longer that you're invested for. But if you delay your investing journey, then the compounding that we talk about, that is the eighth wonder of the world, that happens with investing and investments, it can really cost you so much money. The numbers are absolutely phenomenal. And I'm sure we've done examples before about starting early, investing for 10 years and then stopping, and then, starting your investment versus starting your investment journey 10 years later, but contributing 2 or 3 times more. You're actually better off in the first scenario. But not starting and delaying that, essentially time is money in this instance. And that could be whether it's, portfolio itself, it could be purchasing a property. You've got, over time, there's less equity because you haven't experienced the growth, which then, if you're pulling equity out to then purchase another property, it's delaying that. So the impact of delaying is not just necessarily on the portfolio itself, but it could be, okay, what about step 2 and step 3? It could delay that as well. So for me, time is money, and it's the power of compounding. You want to get started as early as you possibly can to allow it to do its thing.
Yeah, exactly right. And the earlier that you start, the better off that you are. And the exact same thing is in reverse, where the later that you start, the more difficult that it becomes and the more that you need to contribute to get the same result. And one of the perfect examples of it is when you start talking about a property. Mm-hmm. And we've seen this happen a lot, particularly with first-time buyers, where you look at the cost of purchasing a property. One is just the total cost of the property itself, but then the transaction costs around stamp duty and all of that stuff if you're not sort of qualifying for any first-home buyers or anything. And it's really easy to become paralyzed by it all. Yeah. And it's really easy to, hear someone talking at the family barbecue and saying, hey, prices can't stay at this level forever. It's going to crash and it's going to come down by 50% and whatever that number is. And you see people waiting, and they're waiting for something to happen in order to be able to enter the market. And a lot of times, or if history is correct, those chickens never come home to roost. And eventually you purchase into the property market, but you're doing so at a high purchase price. And what that's doing is your debt position is higher. The property that you've purchased is more expensive. So yes, there's an initial, cost of, maybe that property was $650, you ended up buying for $750, and it, ends up costing $100,000 more. And that seems like that's what it's cost you by delaying action.
Yeah.
But what it's actually cost you is so much more, because your ability to generate equity in that property, your ability to then use that equity to invest, or use that equity to snowball into another property, or sell that property to buy something bigger, is now behind. And so not only is the first property more expensive, the second property, the third property, everything along your wealth creation becomes delayed. And that's not to say that you just get in when you can't afford it and, put yourself into financial stress. That's absolutely not the solution. But the solution is, if your circumstances permit, if the numbers say that you can do it, if you're not overextending yourself, getting into a transaction and taking a form of action is usually the best course of action, because not making a decision is a decision.
Mm-hmm. Yep. No, well said. Well said. I think on that one too, just with the property per se, or look, anything that you've got debt or leverage on, if you're delaying that, I mean, we've been speaking about the growth aspect of it, but the other thing too is your debt elimination strategy. If you start 2 years later, theoretically, it's going to take you 2 years longer to be debt free. It's not exactly like that. It's actually longer because you assume that the purchase price and the debt amount is higher. But so I guess the message with all of this is you got to start early. Yeah. You need to start early, and you need to allow the assets time to grow and do their thing. And the earlier that you start looking back at all of the data, the better off you are. That then translates for me, Andrew, into superannuation. And I guess the nature of super is easy to take a long-term stance and start early, because that happens automatically for you, because it's legislated in Australia that when you're working, your employer needs to pay you your superannuation contribution. So when you start working, it's at the start of your working career, and you're essentially in that system, for most people anyway, until you can hit, a certain age, or you've got some accessibility to be able to access your superannuation. You're stuck in the system, and it's designed to do this, to keep you in, to allow that compounding to take effect. So your time frame is naturally set, assuming that you start your working career somewhere in your 20s. You can't access it till, best case scenario, age 60. You're in there for at least 40 years. It allows it to do its thing. And when we do our modelling, and when we talk to people about superannuation contributions, if you look at, and going back to the compounding that we were talking about, if you look at the difference that even small contributions make over a long period of time, I think that's the best way that I can articulate that and show people that. It's amazing how those small contributions and those little things actually result in really big outcomes as well too.
Yeah, exactly right. And even some of the other things, when you're talking about, concessional contributions, so tax deductible contributions, yes, you can look back 5 years, but if you were already at the point where that's coming into expiry and you're losing years, so if you're not making additional contributions and you're thinking about making additional contributions, you're missing out on the ability to, or you're losing some of those caps that you may have otherwise utilized. Same story with, government co-contributions, and making sure that if you don't use it in that year, that's it, it's gone. So the earlier that you can start on all of those things, the more money that's in that system, the more that it can compound, the more that it can grow, particularly in a lower tax environment. It only bodes well for your ultimate wealth creation.
Yep. Insurance is another natural one for me.
Yeah.
Obviously, insurance in particular, it's one of those things, right? We get more things start to go wrong with us, generally speaking, as we get older.
Yeah.
So the longer that you leave it, the larger the health issues generally become for most people. With insurance per se, because that's the case, as we age, even if there's nothing wrong with us, the probability of something happening increases. So the premiums start to get more and more and more expensive. So making sure that you've got that earlier, and especially when we talk around things like exclusions and stuff, that's probably where the rubber hits the roads with this. But if you've got something wrong with you, a medical issue, the insurer may offer you cover, but they may exclude that particular medical condition.
Yeah.
If you can take out the cover before that happens, maybe when you're younger and you didn't have a bad back or sore knees or whatever it may be, you get that cover in place, you don't have the exclusion. So taking advantage of that while you're younger is definitely a better opportunity to try and then prevent any adverse, I guess, terms down the track as well too. So insurance is definitely another one from my perspective as well. There's also the health insurance one, and making sure that's before age 30, depending on how much money you're earning and stuff. But yeah, insurance is another one from my end.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think especially in this environment, and as things are changing, particularly with RBA and reducing interest rates and all of that stuff, same story when you are talking about, refinancing and looking at whether you have the most cost competitive option from a home loan perspective. For a lot of people, the largest expense that they will ever have is going to be their mortgage. And if you can drop the interest rate on that mortgage, even by what seems like a relatively small number, that means that, one, there's either additional income in the household that you can use to invest and grow your wealth, or alternatively, that, cost saving from an interest rate perspective can make a huge difference when you're paying down your loan quicker and you're putting more money that's going towards the principal of your loan. Mm-hmm. So your debt elimination strategy becomes a lot easier.
Yeah.
I know that you spoke about your debt elimination strategy and what that does from a cash flow side of things. And if you can pull multiple levers all at the same time and constantly review it to make sure that it's right and it's appropriate for you. On one hand, you're bringing down debt. On the other hand, you're increasing wealth, and you're doing both things rather than just one.
Yep. Delaying your decision to get a financial plan in place, what I tend to think, and I guess it's like anything, if you don't have the structure and you don't have the discipline, what I think it can lead to is potentially lifestyle creep. So just not spending intentionally, that's probably a really good way of saying it, versus being intentional with your spending and your wealth building efforts as well too. And we tend to find that without having a plan in place, money just tends to disappear. So a lot of the concepts that we talk about when we do talk about a cash flow strategy or a wealth creation strategy, but then you structure your banking so essentially every dollar that you earn has a job. So this goes here, this goes there. You put the guardrails and the parameters in place that actually do that, and you can allocate that money with intent as opposed to not having a plan and then it just disappearing. And then you go, and I've said it 1,000 times before, but geez, imagine how much money I'd have now if I didn't spend it all and blow it up the wall every Friday and Saturday night going out drinking with my friends in my early 20s, right? That sort of stuff. So you don't want to look back on this and go, geez, which I guess is a good conduit into the next thing. But having a strategy in place definitely helps with that as well too, because it means that you're doing something today rather than delaying it and starting down the track.
And I like that one as well, because sometimes you don't know what you don't know, and delaying a decision is not, yes, there's the financial implication of, hey, if I don't actually have a proper structure and a strategy, then okay, yes, I may not achieve my wealth creation goals. I may not be putting money aside. There's that aspect of it. But then there's also the flip side. So there's also, times where we sit in front of a client and they're already at the point where they can slow down work. They're already at the point where you've accumulated enough wealth to be able to retire comfortably and meet all of your financial goals, but they don't know it yet because they've delayed getting advice and seeing how they can structure their finances in order to receive a retirement income. So there's also the lifestyle implication of, oh shit, for the last 3 years, I've been working 40 hours a week thinking that I needed to do so because I needed to hit a particular number in terms of assets in order to be able to retire. Damn, I wish I saw you earlier.
Yeah.
Not necessarily to, fully retire, but, reduce hours and work part-time and work 2 days a week and have spent more time with grandchildren. That happens often because all too often people are just on this, accumulation rat wheel, and that's great maybe in your early years, but in your later years, not having the foresight or not having the understanding of this is what I can do to generate an income from my investments means that you're just in the workforce for longer. And while that might have accumulated more assets, and it sounds counterintuitive for a financial advisor to say, there's the lost opportunity cost of time that you could have spent in other areas to give you fulfillment.
100%. And the emotional impact that has. Like, I've always been one of the opinion and wanting to get to a stage where I never look back and say, or have regrets and say, I wish I did this, I wish I did that. And I think with a lot of the bigger decisions in my life, I look back on it, and when I reflect, I'm like, I could have done it earlier. And almost I wish that I did it earlier. And that could be anything, getting married to my spouse, buying a house, having kids, you name it, whatever it may be. Everything happens for a reason. But
we're going to go into a very different direction maybe in this podcast, but because I have heard a quote that I absolutely love. But anyway, we'll finish this point and we'll
definitely want to hear it. But my point being is that it's like what you were saying before, where people come and see us and go, "I wish I saw you earlier."
Yep.
You don't want to have that looking back on anything. We're talking about a financial plan in particular, but you don't want to have that looking back and going, "Oh, geez, I wish I did it earlier."
Yeah. Exactly right.
What's this quote, Andrew?
It was.
I'm curious.
It was Alex Hormozy, who was talking on a podcast and absolutely loved it. And he said, "Look, I never have any regrets because you talk about the butterfly effect and you talk about one small change here and the impact that it has and where you are at a future point in time, and you can't have any regrets because you don't know what direction you would have taken, but." Is like, despite not having any regrets, what I wish that I could do, and I talk myself into doing now, is I wish that while I was going through periods of stress and while I was going through periods of growth, I wish I did it with more calmness and not with the same level of anxiety, and I enjoyed the process more. And so I love that because it's not changing or regretting any of the decisions that you've made, but maybe some of your feelings and some of the way that you've responded to those things happening.
It's sound advice, and it's easy to say that upon reflection.
Correct.
But when you're in it and you're getting the crap beaten out of you, it's pretty hard to say that and be of that particular mindset. But yeah, look, I love all of the content that he puts out as well too. He's absolutely phenomenal in terms of what he's achieved in business and also in terms of his mindset as well too. And he goes to the gym every so often, and he seems to do all right with that as well too, right?
Yeah. He's trying to keep up the tour bus.
Don't know if that's the case. But look, procrastination and delaying things is also a decision as well too. And at least in my experience, when I do talk about this with people, and where the penny tends to drop, at least for me when I'm having these conversations with people of late, is when you turn around and demonstrate this, especially when it comes to children.
Yep.
So you say, okay, we're going to put a strategy together to get them into a property when they're older, or pay for schooling when they're older, or pay for education, or whatever it may be. And a small amount of money really goes a long way. And you delay that, and the circumstances and the outcome is completely different. And I think if you do that, you're always making excuses. It's just procrastinating, and then always finding a reason not to do it.
Yeah.
And you're losing the most valuable weapon that you've got, which is time, coming back to the first point. But I think procrastination is also a decision as well too. And, we tend to sweat the smaller stuff, and the bigger stuff we just tend to overlook and discount.
Well, I guess because the bigger stuff, you're normally just following conventional wisdom.
Yeah.
And with all of this, I tend to find, one, there's the impact of the decision that you're making today, right? So all of the stuff that we've spoken about around, hey, if I, delay a particular decision, what impact is that going to have on my wealth creation? What impact is that going to have on, that particular transaction? But the other thing is you can only have and you can only hold so many different thoughts and so many different actions at one point in time. So you can only make so many decisions. So if you're delaying this particular decision, well, what are the other, yes, there's the impact of, hey, had I started this earlier, I would have done better and all of that stuff. But it's, what are the other decisions that I could have, made that decision, moved on to the next thing, and then moved on to the next thing. Like maybe I'm 3 decisions ahead by not, procrastinating or
talking about compounding your decisions.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's the compound of the investment, but there's also the compound of the decisions. And truth be told, imperfect action is better than perfect inaction. So I think that's the perfect quote to end the episode on.
I was thinking of the same thing, like a quote, and I was thinking, Nike, just do it. But no, yours sounds a lot more intelligent, so we'll stick with your one.
We'll do Nike Just Do It. If they decide to sponsor the episode and sponsor the podcast, then maybe that's the next call out that we need.
Maybe you're absolutely right. So to our listeners and our viewers, look, hopefully you got a whole heap out of that in terms of procrastinating and delaying your decision, especially when it comes to investing. If you want any more information, as always, reach out to Andrew and myself. Details are in the show notes. Andrew, thanks for today.
Thanks a lot, Bills, and look forward to catching you all in the next podcast.
Thanks. Thanks for listening today. If you have any questions on what we talked about or would like to have a chat about your money journey, visit us at 360fs.com.au. The information in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into account your personal objectives, financial situation, or needs. It is not financial, legal, or tax advice and should not be relied upon as such. You should consider whether the information is appropriate to your circumstances and seek professional advice before acting on any of the information provided. Past performance is not a reliable indicator of future performance. This information is provided by Billy Amaritis and Andrew Nicolaou of 360 Financial Strategists Proprietary Limited, authorised representatives and credit representatives of Acumen Financial Planning Proprietary Limited.